The night was supposed to be quiet, just another evening in the small apartment Anna shared with her husband Mark. The lights flickered softly above the kitchen counter, the smell of fresh coffee filling the air. Anna, 7 months pregnant, held her belly gently as she leaned against the table. Her body was heavy, but her heart was heavier. Mark had come home late again, reeking of alcohol, his shirt wrinkled, his eyes full of rage rather than warmth. Anna tried to keep her voice calm. "Mark, please, sit down. You've been drinking. I'll make you something to eat." She hoped her soft tone would ease his anger, but Mark slammed his fist against the counter, the sound echoing through the room like a gunshot. "Shut up, Anna," he shouted, his voice slurred but sharp. "You think you can tell me what to do? You're nothing but a burden. Always whining, always weak. Look at you, pregnant and useless." Tears welled in Anna's eyes, but she bit her lip, holding them back. She had learned that crying only made him angrier. Her trembling hands reached for a glass of water, trying to distract him, trying to avoid the storm she knew was coming. But then Mark's eyes fell on the steaming pot of coffee sitting on the stove. His lips twisted into a cruel smile. "You want to play the perfect wife, huh? Let's see how perfect you are when you're burned." Before Anna could react, he grabbed the pot and, in a single brutal motion, hurled the boiling coffee at her. The scalding liquid splashed across her chest and face. Anna screamed, the sound tearing through the walls as her body collapsed to the floor. Her hands flew to her belly, instinctively protecting the tiny life inside her. The searing pain was unbearable, her skin blistering within seconds. She tried to crawl away, but her body was weak. Her sobs echoed in the kitchen, mixing with Mark's heavy breathing. For a moment, he just stood there, watching her suffer, his face dark with twisted satisfaction. Anna's screams carried down the hallway, loud enough for a neighbor to hear. Mrs. Collins, an older woman living next door, rushed to the door, knocking frantically. "Anna! Anna! What's happening?" But Mark didn't answer. Instead, he kicked the door shut, locking it tight, trapping Anna inside with her monster. On the floor, Anna whispered desperately, "Please, my baby." Her voice cracked, fading into sobs. She knew she had to hold on, had to survive, for the tiny heartbeat within her. But the fire in her skin was spreading, and her vision began to blur. Outside, Mrs. Collins reached for her phone, her fingers shaking as she dialed 911. The sound of Anna's cries made her heart race. She knew something terrible had just happened inside that apartment. What no one knew yet was that this single moment would change everything. That Anna's pain tonight would awaken a storm of justice her cruel husband never expected, because someone was about to make him pay. The ambulance sirens wailed through the night as Anna was rushed toward the hospital. Her body trembled violently, her skin red and blistered, her dress soaked with coffee and tears. 2 paramedics worked frantically beside her, placing an oxygen mask over her face. "Stay with us, ma'am. Don't close your eyes," one of them urged, his voice sharp but desperate. Anna could barely speak, but she pressed her hands against her swollen belly, whispering through the mask, "My baby. Please, save my baby." Her eyes rolled back as waves of pain coursed through her, but the thought of losing her child kept her clinging to consciousness. When they reached the emergency room, doctors and nurses swarmed around her, pushing her onto a gurney and wheeling her inside. The harsh white lights of the hospital ceiling blurred above her. The air smelled of antiseptic and urgency. Her cries echoed down the hallway, piercing the sterile silence. Dr. Patel, the attending physician, quickly examined her burns and checked her vitals. But it wasn't just Anna's injuries that worried him. He glanced at the monitor, his face tightening. "We're losing the heartbeat," he whispered urgently to the nurse. The words hit Anna like a knife. She grabbed his sleeve weakly, her voice hoarse. "No, please, don't let my baby die. Please!" The nurse tried to calm her, stroking her arm gently. "We're doing everything we can, sweetheart. Just hold on." But Anna could see the worry in her eyes. Meanwhile, Mrs. Collins, the neighbor who had called 911, stood outside the emergency room doors. She had ridden in the ambulance, shaken by the horror she'd witnessed. She paced back and forth, clutching her phone tightly. She knew she had to call someone, Anna's father. Her fingers trembled as she scrolled through her contacts. At last, she found his number. When Robert answered, his voice was calm but edged with concern. "Hello, Robert? It's me, Mrs. Collins. You need to come to the hospital." It's Anna. She's been hurt, badly. There was silence on the line. Then the sound of a sharp inhale. What happened? Her voice cracked. It was Mark. He threw boiling coffee on her. She's burned, Robert, and she's pregnant. The phone line went dead. Robert had already left, his heart pounding, rage boiling inside him. Back in the emergency room, Anna drifted in and out of consciousness. She saw flashes of the doctor's worried face, the green lines of the monitor, the sterile white walls closing in around her. Her body shook uncontrollably as she whispered her baby's name, the name she had secretly chosen but never told Mark. Suddenly, the monitor emitted a loud, continuous beep. The heartbeat was fading. The room erupted in chaos as doctors shouted commands and nurses scrambled for equipment. Anna screamed, reaching out desperately. "No, my baby. Please don't take my baby." Dr. Patel shook his head, his face grim as he worked tirelessly to stabilize both mother and child. The tension was unbearable, every second stretching into eternity. Outside, Mrs. Collins wept silently, praying Robert would arrive before it was too late. Then, as the machines blared and Anna's body convulsed in agony, the doctor's words fell like a hammer. "We might not be able to save the baby." The hospital room fell into a heavy silence. The frantic sounds of machines and rushing footsteps were replaced by a cold, suffocating stillness. Anna's body trembled on the hospital bed, her burns bandaged, her skin pale, but her eyes were wide open, searching, desperate. Dr. Patel removed his gloves slowly, his face etched with sorrow. He approached the bedside, lowering his voice. "Anna, I am so sorry. We did everything we could, but the trauma, the burns, the shock, your baby didn't survive." The words shattered her world. Anna gasped as though her lungs had collapsed, her hands clutching at her belly in disbelief. No, that's not true. My baby is strong. My baby was moving just yesterday." "You're lying." Her voice cracked into screams, echoing through the sterile white walls. Nurses moved to comfort her, but Anna fought them off, shaking her head violently. Tears streamed down her blistered cheeks, burning worse than the coffee that had scarred her skin. She clawed at the sheets, her body writhing in agony. "Please, bring my baby back. Please, God, no." Mrs. Collins, standing just outside the room, covered her mouth as tears filled her eyes. She had seen Anna pregnant, glowing with joy only weeks ago. Now she watched the young woman break into pieces, her sobs so raw that they pierced the soul. The doctor placed a gentle hand on Anna's shoulder. "You're lucky to be alive. Your body went into shock. We managed to stabilize you, but—" He hesitated. The baby's heart stopped. "I am truly sorry." Anna shook her head, her sobs turning into a hollow, aching moan. Her hands pressed against her belly as if holding on to a child who was no longer there. "I promised I'd protect you," she whispered. "Mommy promised." Her voice faded into silence as she collapsed back onto the bed, utterly broken. Moments later, the door burst open. Robert rushed inside, his police uniform still on, his face pale with terror. He froze when he saw his daughter lying there, her body wrapped in bandages, her eyes swollen with tears. "Anna!" he cried, running to her side. He took her hand gently, but she didn't look at him. Her gaze was fixed on the ceiling, empty, lifeless. "Dad, I lost my baby." The strength drained from Robert's body. For a man who had faced criminals, violence, and bloodshed for decades, nothing had ever broken him. But now, tears fell freely down his face. He pulled his daughter into his arms, careful of her wounds, holding her like she was still the little girl he once carried home from school. Robert's jaw clenched. His grief turned into fire. He knew exactly who was responsible. "Mark," he whispered, his voice low and deadly. "He did this. He will pay." Anna's tears soaked his chest as she whispered, "Don't leave me, Dad. Please don't leave me alone." Robert stroked her hair gently, his eyes blazing with rage. He kissed her forehead and said, "I'm here, Anna. I'm not going anywhere, but I swear to you, that man will never hurt you again." Outside the room, 2 police officers stood waiting, having just received Robert's orders. Their presence signaled the beginning of something Mark could never escape, because justice was already on its way to his doorstep. Robert sat beside Anna's hospital bed, his hand never leaving hers. The rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor filled the silence, each sound a reminder that his daughter was alive. But her baby, his grandchild, was gone forever. The weight of that loss pressed on his chest like a stone, but beneath the grief, a storm brewed. Anna lay motionless, her eyes swollen, her body covered in bandages. She had barely spoken since whispering the words that had torn his heart apart. "Dad, I lost my baby." Those words repeated in his mind like an echo he couldn't silence. Robert was not just a father, he was a man of the law. A decorated police officer with decades of service. He had seen murderers, thieves, and abusers. He had put countless men behind bars. But never, in all his years, had he felt such rage as he did now. Because this wasn't just another case. This was his daughter. Mrs. Collins entered the room quietly, her hands clasped tightly together. She looked at Robert with tear-filled eyes. "I heard everything. I'm so sorry, Robert. I saw it with my own eyes. Mark," he poured the coffee on her like she was nothing. "I called 911 because I thought he was going to kill her." Robert's jaw tightened, his knuckles white as he clenched his fists. "Thank you, Margaret. You did the right thing. Your statement will be critical." His voice was calm, but beneath that calmness was fire. Anna stirred slightly, her voice hoarse. "Dad, he'll come back. He'll hurt me again." Robert leaned down, looking straight into her tearful eyes. "Listen to me, Anna. I promise you, he will never lay a hand on you again. He won't have the chance." He kissed her forehead, then stood tall, his uniform catching the dim hospital light. At that moment, Robert was no longer just a grieving father, he was a commander preparing for battle. He turned to the two officers waiting outside the door. "Find him. Tonight, I want him in custody before dawn." The officers nodded, their faces grim. They knew better than to question Robert when his voice carried that deadly edge. As they left, Robert returned to his daughter's side. "Rest, Anna. Focus on healing. Leave the rest to me." Anna tried to protest weakly, shaking her head. "Dad, don't do anything reckless. I don't want you to get hurt because of me." Robert's lips tightened into a thin line. "You've already suffered enough. My only job now is to make sure justice is served. Mark made his choice the moment he raised his hand against you. He'll answer for it." Outside the hospital window, the city lights flickered in the distance. Somewhere out there, Mark was free, probably drinking, maybe even with his mistress, completely unaware of the storm about to descend on him. Robert walked to the window, staring out into the night. His reflection glared back at him, eyes burning with both grief and fury. For the first time in years, he felt powerless as a father. But as a man of law, he knew exactly what needed to be done. He clenched his fists, whispering to himself, "By tomorrow, Mark will be in handcuffs." The hospital corridor was silent, except for the distant sound of shoes squeaking against polished floors. Anna lay weak in her bed, drifting in and out of a restless sleep, while Robert stood guard like a soldier. His arms were crossed, his uniform still on, and his eyes never left the door. He knew the man responsible was still out there, and part of him wanted nothing more than to hunt him down immediately. But then, the door creaked open. Mark stepped inside. His face was pale, his eyes red, not from guilt but from a night of drinking. He carried a bouquet of cheap flowers in one hand, his movements slow, calculated. Robert's body stiffened instantly. His hand instinctively went to his holster, though he restrained himself. "What are you doing here?" His voice was sharp like a blade. Mark swallowed hard, lowering his eyes. "I just wanted to see her. I didn't mean for it to go that far. It was a mistake, Robert. I lost my temper." He set the flowers on the bedside table, their bright colors mocking the somber room. Anna stirred at the sound of his voice. Her eyes fluttered open, filled with fear. She gasped, instinctively clutching her blanket, as though it could protect her. "No, not you," she whispered. Mark raised his hands, his voice soft, almost pleading. "Anna, please, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to hurt you or the baby. It was the alcohol, it wasn't me. I swear I'll change." Robert stepped forward, placing himself between Mark and Anna. His eyes narrowed, sharp as steel. "Don't you dare use that excuse. Don't you dare stand here and act like this wasn't your choice. You threw that coffee, Mark. You killed your own child." For a moment, Mark's mask slipped. His jaw tightened, his eyes darkened. But then, just as quickly, he forced himself back into the role of a grieving husband. He dropped to his knees, tears streaming down his face. "I know I messed up. I'll go to counseling. I'll quit drinking. Just give me one more chance. Please, Anna, I love you." Anna's chest rose and fell with shallow breaths. She wanted to scream, to tell him that love doesn't burn, love doesn't kill. But her voice failed her. The trauma had stolen her words. Robert saw it clearly, the manipulation, the performance. He had interrogated hundreds of criminals in his life, and Mark was no different. His crocodile tears, his trembling hands, his pathetic apologies, they were all rehearsed, designed to exploit Anna's fragile state. Robert leaned down, his voice low and cold. "You're not here for her. You're here for yourself. But listen carefully, Mark. Your lies won't work this time. I'm not just her father. I'm the law. And I will see you behind bars." Mark's eyes flickered with panic. He quickly stood, his mask slipping again, and backed toward the door. "You can't do that. You have no proof." Robert's lips curved into a grim smile. "Don't worry. I'll get all the proof I need." As Mark fled the room, Robert turned back to his daughter, gently stroking her hair. "Rest, Anna. He's losing control, and soon he'll lose everything." What Robert didn't know was that Mark had already set his own plan in motion, one that would make the battle for justice far more dangerous. Because Mark wasn't ready to give up without a fight. Robert had spent his life piecing together evidence, solving crimes others thought impossible. Now, with his own daughter's life shattered, he knew the only way to protect her was to expose Mark completely for what he had done inside their home and for the secrets he had tried so hard to bury. The morning after Mark's fake apology, Robert arrived at the precinct. His colleagues, who had long respected him as a decorated officer, were already waiting. He handed them a folder filled with preliminary notes. "We're building a case against Mark Turner. Domestic abuse, assault with intent to harm, possible manslaughter due to the loss of the unborn child, and I want every lead investigated." Detective Harris, the younger officer under Robert's command, raised an eyebrow. "Sir, you know this won't be easy. He's going to deny everything." Robert's voice was steady, but his eyes burned with fire. "Then we'll find proof he can't deny." Within hours, officers began knocking on doors, speaking with neighbors. Mrs. Collins gave a full statement, recalling every scream, every desperate cry she had heard through the thin apartment walls. Her voice shook as she described Mark's rage, her hands trembling as she signed the report. "She's been hiding bruises for months," Mrs. Collins whispered. "I told her to leave him, but she always said he would change. Poor girl, she didn't want to disappoint anyone." The testimony was powerful, but Robert knew it wasn't enough. He needed hard evidence. That's when Harris returned with something damning, a set of photographs. "Sir, we pulled security footage from the building across the street. Take a look at this." On the screen, Mark could be seen stumbling into the apartment with another woman, his arm wrapped around her waist. The timestamp showed it had happened while Anna was still recovering from her first trimester sickness. Later footage revealed multiple visits, each time with the same woman. Robert's stomach turned. Not only had Mark abused Anna, he had humiliated her, betraying her while she carried his child. The sight of him laughing with his mistress while Anna sat alone at home was enough to make Robert's blood boil. He clenched his jaw, his voice tight. "Get me her name. I want to know everything about her." That evening, Robert returned to the hospital. Anna sat propped against her pillows, still weak, but her eyes lifted as he entered. She searched his face, trying to read his silence. "Dad, what did you find?" Robert pulled a chair close, taking her hand gently. "Enough to prove what I already knew. He didn't just hurt you, Anna. He betrayed you with another woman while you carried his child. We have footage, witnesses, statements." Anna's lips trembled, her eyes filling with tears. "So, all this time, while I was fighting for our baby, he was with her?" Robert nodded, his grip firm. "Yes, and this is the evidence that will lock him away. He thinks he's untouchable, but he's wrong. We'll show the world who he really is." Anna broke down, sobbing into her father's arms. The truth was unbearable, but it also ignited something inside her, a flicker of strength she thought she had lost. What neither of them knew was that Mark had already sensed the investigation closing in, and he was preparing to strike back before the walls caved in, and his next move would put everyone in even greater danger. Robert sat in the dimly lit hospital room, the soft hum of machines surrounding him as Anna slept. Her face was pale, her lips cracked from dehydration, and her body wrapped in bandages. Watching her chest rise and fall slowly was both a relief and a torment. Relief that she was alive, torment that she had suffered at the hands of a man who had sworn to protect her. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped tightly together. Memories of Anna as a child flooded his mind. The little girl who once ran into his arms after school, the teenager who cried when she thought she had disappointed him, the young woman who once believed in love. Now she was broken, and the light in her eyes had dimmed. The door opened quietly. Detective Harris stepped inside, carrying a folder. His expression was grim. "Sir, we've compiled everything. Witness testimony, photos, security footage. It's strong. If we push this case, we can nail him." Robert took the folder, flipping through the damning evidence. Each page was another blade twisting in his chest. Photos of bruises, video stills of Mark with his mistress, statements from neighbors about the screaming fights. It was a trail of cruelty that painted Mark exactly as he was, a violent coward. Harris hesitated. "But you know how these cases go. Defense attorneys will argue it was an accident, that the burns were unintended. They'll try to make Anna look hysterical, unstable. And with the mistress, they'll say it's irrelevant. We need Anna to testify," but his eyes softened. "She's fragile. I don't know if she can handle it." Robert closed the folder slowly, his eyes narrowing. "She shouldn't have to. She's suffered enough. This isn't just about her anymore. It's about justice." He stood, walking to the side of Anna's bed. He brushed a strand of hair from her face, his voice breaking as he whispered, "You deserved happiness, Anna. You deserved safety. But he stole that from you. He stole my grandchild, and for that—" His voice hardened, his jaw clenching. "He will pay dearly." Turning back to Harris, Robert's eyes burned with determination. "I swear to you, as a father and as an officer, I will not rest until Mark spends the rest of his life behind bars. I don't care how clever his lawyer thinks he is. I don't care who he begs for help. He will not walk free. He will never touch another woman again." At that moment, Anna stirred, half conscious. Her cracked voice whispered, "Dad, don't waste your life on him, please." Robert leaned close, his voice soft yet unshakable. "This isn't about wasting my life, Anna. This is about saving yours. This is about making sure no other woman ever suffers the way you did." He kissed her forehead gently, then straightened, his silhouette cast against the hospital light. For the first time since the tragedy, Anna saw a spark of strength and safety in her father's eyes. Robert turned toward the door, his voice steady as stone. "Mark Turner will pay with his freedom, and maybe even his life." The courthouse buzzed with hushed whispers as reporters gathered outside, their cameras flashing under the morning sun. The case of Anna Turner versus Mark Turner had already drawn attention. An expectant mother burned by her own husband. It was the kind of story that sparked outrage, and the community wanted justice. Inside, Anna sat quietly in the front row beside her father. She wore a simple dress, her bandages hidden beneath long sleeves. Her face still bore faint scars, but the deeper wounds were invisible, the loss of her baby, the betrayal of her marriage. Robert sat beside her, his hand resting protectively on hers, his eyes never leaving the courtroom doors. Then they opened. Mark walked in, escorted by his lawyer dressed in a sharp suit and polished shoes. He looked nothing like the man who had destroyed Anna's life. His hair was neatly combed, his expression calm, even smug. He spotted Anna and gave a slight nod, as if daring her to believe his charade of innocence. Robert's blood boiled, but he forced himself to stay composed. This was a battlefield, and the weapon here was truth. The judge entered, and everyone rose. Once seated, the defense lawyer wasted no time. "Your Honor, my client pleads not guilty to the charges of aggravated assault and reckless endangerment. The incident in question was a tragic accident, not a deliberate act. Mr. Turner deeply regrets what happened and has come here to clear his name." Gasps echoed in the courtroom. Anna's chest tightened. Accident? How could he call it that? She saw the coffee in his hands, saw the rage in his eyes. She remembered the searing pain, the screams, the heartbeat of her baby fading. Accident? It was murder in slow motion. Robert leaned close to her ear. "Stay calm. This is just the beginning." The prosecutor rose, his tone firm. "Your Honor, the victim sustained second-degree burns after Mr. Turner threw a pot of boiling coffee directly at her. She was 7 months pregnant at the time. The child did not survive. This was no accident. We have witness testimony, security footage, and evidence of repeated domestic violence. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom as photographs of Anna's injuries were displayed on the screen. Her burned skin, the hospital records, the medical report confirming the loss of her unborn child. Anna closed her eyes, unable to look, but Robert squeezed her hand, grounding her. Mark shifted in his seat, but his lawyer quickly stood again. Your Honor, these so-called witnesses are unreliable. Neighbors overheard arguments. They cannot confirm intent. As for the footage, it only shows my client entering his building. It proves nothing. We ask that the charges be reduced. Robert clenched his fists, his jaw tightening. He could see the smugness returning to Mark's face, the belief that he could lie his way out of this. The judge leaned forward, studying the documents, then said, "The court will proceed with the evidence hearing. Until then, bail is granted." Anna's heart stopped. Bail? That meant Mark could walk free, for now. As Mark turned to leave, he glanced back at Anna, his lips curling into a cruel smirk only she could see. And in that moment, Anna realized something chilling. Mark wasn't afraid of prison. He was planning his next move. The courthouse buzz had barely settled when the doors swung open again. Heads turned, whispers filled the air, and every reporter in the room raised their cameras. A woman entered, tall, elegant, dressed in a red dress, far too bold for the somber atmosphere. Her heels clicked against the marble floor with deliberate confidence. Anna's heart dropped. She knew who this woman was even before anyone said her name. This was Claire, Mark's mistress. The woman he had wrapped his arms around in the security footage. The woman he had chosen over his wife, even as Anna carried his child. Claire strutted forward, her gaze locking with Anna's for just a second. There was no shame in her eyes, only a cruel kind of pride. She took a seat behind the defense table, close enough to brush Mark's shoulder. The smirk on Mark's face grew wider. Robert's jaw clenched so hard his teeth nearly cracked. He leaned toward Detective Harris, whispering sharply, "What the hell is she doing here?" Harris whispered back, "Defense listed her as a character witness. They're going to try and paint him as a good man who just lost control." Robert's fists balled at his sides. Good man? The sight of his daughter's burns, her empty womb, flashed in his mind. And now this woman was going to sit there and lie to protect the monster who destroyed Anna's life. The judge called for order as Claire took the stand. She crossed her legs, her voice smooth and rehearsed. "Mark is not the violent man he's being accused of. I've known him for almost a year. He's kind, generous, and patient. If something happened that night, it was because Anna provoked him. She's always been unstable, jealous, and controlling." Anna gasped, her hand flying to her chest. The words cut deeper than any wound. She shook her head violently, tears spilling from her eyes. "That's not true," she cried, her voice cracking. The judge banged the gavel. "Order in the court." Robert's rage boiled over, but he held himself back. He knew one wrong move would jeopardize everything. Instead, he glared at Claire with eyes that could pierce steel. He knew her type, a woman willing to sell her soul for a man's money, even if it meant spitting on the grave of an unborn child. The prosecutor stood, pacing slowly before the witness. "So, you're claiming Anna was unstable? That she caused her own burns?" Claire smirked. "Exactly. She was desperate to keep Mark. She probably made it worse herself just to get sympathy." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Anna buried her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. Robert placed a strong arm around her shoulders, whispering fiercely, "Don't you listen to her. The truth will come out." The prosecutor leaned closer to Claire. "Tell me, Miss Claire, where were you the night Anna was admitted to the hospital?" For the first time, Claire hesitated. She shifted in her seat, her confident mask slipping for just a moment. The prosecutor pressed harder, his voice sharp. "Were you with Mark? Did you spend the night together while his pregnant wife was fighting for her life?" Claire's lips parted, her eyes darting nervously toward Mark, and in that silent exchange, everyone in the room felt the air shift. Something wasn't adding up. Mark's smug expression faltered. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, whispering something frantically to his lawyer. And Robert knew in his gut. Claire was hiding a secret that could destroy Mark completely. The courtroom held its breath. All eyes were fixed on Claire, the mistress whose confidence was now cracking under the weight of the prosecutor's question. She glanced at Mark, her perfectly painted nails gripping the edge of the witness stand. He stared back at her, his jaw tight, his eyes screaming at her to hold the line. But fear had already taken root in Claire's heart. The prosecutor's voice was steady, precise. "Miss Claire, where were you on the night Anna was rushed to the hospital? Answer truthfully. Remember, perjury is a crime." Claire swallowed hard, her throat bobbing. For a long moment, silence stretched through the courtroom. Then she broke. "Yes," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Yes, I was with him that night. He came to me after everything happened." Gasps filled the room. Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras flashed, and the judge banged the gavel for order. Mark's face turned red, his mask of calm shattering. He leaned forward, hissing at her under his breath. "Shut up! Don't you dare say more." But Claire wasn't finished. Tears welled in her eyes as she looked at the prosecutor, her voice growing louder. "I can't lie for him anymore. Mark told me what happened. He said he was sick of Anna, sick of being trapped with her and the baby. He bragged that throwing the coffee would teach her a lesson. He laughed about it. I can't live with that on my conscience." The courtroom erupted in chaos. Anna clutched her chest, her tears spilling freely as Robert's arm wrapped around her shoulders, steadying her. For the first time, someone besides her father was speaking the truth out loud, exposing the monster Mark truly was. Mark shot up from his seat, his lawyer tugging at his arm desperately. "She's lying. She's just bitter because I wouldn't leave my wife for her." His voice cracked, panic breaking through. The prosecutor stepped closer to the witness stand. "Miss Claire, did Mark ever show remorse for what he did to Anna and the unborn child?" Claire shook her head, her voice shaking. "No. He said it was Anna's fault. He blamed her for everything. He said the baby was a mistake." The words struck Anna like a blade to the heart. Her sobs echoed through the silent room, but Robert pulled her tighter against him, his eyes locked on Mark with a fury that could burn stone. The judge slammed the gavel again. "Order. Order in this court." Mark's lawyer was pale, flipping frantically through his notes, but the damage was done. Claire had just detonated the bomb that destroyed the defense's case. Robert leaned forward, his voice low enough for only Anna to hear. "He's finished. Do you hear me? That coward is finished." But even as Claire stepped down from the witness stand, her hands shaking, Robert's instincts told him something wasn't right. Mark wasn't the type to accept defeat quietly. Mark sat back down, his chest heaving, his fists clenched so tightly his knuckles turned white. His eyes didn't follow the judge or the jury. They didn't linger on the prosecutor. They locked onto Anna. And in that chilling stare, Robert understood something with terrifying clarity. Mark wasn't done fighting. He was planning revenge. The air inside the courtroom was thick with tension. Reporters leaned forward, pens scratching furiously, cameras poised to capture the moment. Every seat was filled, the entire community waiting to hear whether justice would finally be served. Anna sat between her father and Detective Harris, her hands trembling in her lap. Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst. She had dreaded this day, but she also prayed for it. The day her abuser would no longer walk free. Mark sat across from her, his jaw tight, his eyes dark and unrelenting. The smug arrogance that once danced across his face was gone, replaced with fury. He looked like a man cornered, a predator about to be caged. The judge cleared his throat, his voice echoing through the courtroom. After careful review of the evidence presented, including testimony from neighbors, hospital reports, and Miss Claire's statements, the court finds the defendant, Mark Turner, guilty of aggravated assault and involuntary manslaughter due to the loss of the unborn child. Gasps filled the room. Anna's chest tightened, tears rushing to her eyes. She had prayed to hear that word, guilty, but hearing it aloud broke her open in ways she couldn't describe. The judge continued, his tone firm and resolute. This court sentences Mark Turner to 25 years in state prison without the possibility of parole for the first 15 years. The gavel struck, the sharp crack reverberating through the room. Anna covered her mouth, sobbing uncontrollably. Her father wrapped an arm around her, pulling her against his chest. He whispered fiercely, "It's over, Anna. He can't hurt you anymore. Justice has been served." But across the aisle, Mark erupted. He slammed his fists on the table, shouting, "This is a lie. You're all against me. I didn't kill anyone. She lost the baby because she's weak." The bailiffs rushed forward, grabbing his arms as he fought against them. His voice filled the courtroom, venomous and raw. "Anna, you think this is over? You think you're safe now? Prison can't hold me forever. One day, I'll come back for you." Anna froze, her body trembling violently. Robert stood, his voice booming across the room. "Sit down and shut your mouth, Mark. You will never touch my daughter again." The bailiffs hauled Mark away, his curses echoing down the corridor as the doors slammed shut behind him. The room slowly settled, but Anna's tears did not stop. She wept, not just for her lost child, but for the years of pain, for the betrayal, for the scars that would never fade. Robert squeezed her hand. "He's gone, Anna. He's finally gone." The prosecutor approached quietly, offering a gentle nod. "You were brave. Today, justice stood on your side." Anna wiped her tears, her voice barely a whisper. "But why does it still hurt so much?" Her father kissed the top of her head. "Because love betrayed you. Because you lost more than anyone should ever lose. But this pain won't last forever. You will rise again." And though the courtroom had declared victory, Robert's instincts whispered otherwise. He had seen the fury in Mark's eyes, the promises of vengeance. As the reporters swarmed outside, hungry for statements, Robert looked at his daughter and thought grimly, the fight isn't truly over. Not yet. The courthouse steps were swarming with reporters, their voices overlapping as microphones stretched toward Anna and Robert. The flashing cameras felt like an assault, each click echoing the pain of the past months. Anna kept her head down, her body trembling. She wasn't ready to be the face of tragedy, she just wanted to disappear. Robert raised a hand, shielding her from the chaos. "No questions today," he barked firmly, his officer's authority cutting through the noise. The reporters reluctantly backed off, though their cameras continued to flash as father and daughter walked past. Outside the courthouse the world was loud, but inside Robert's car, silence fell heavy. Anna sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window, tears blurring the city lights. Her voice finally broke the silence. "Dad, even with him gone, I don't feel safe. His words, they won't leave my head. What if he comes back? What if he finds me someday?" Robert reached across the seat, gently taking her hand in his. His voice was steady, filled with conviction. "Anna, listen to me. I've worn this badge for over 30 years. I've put criminals away who swore vengeance. Some of them were far more dangerous than Mark, and not one of them ever touched me or the people I love again. Do you know why?" Anna turned to him slowly, her eyes swollen. "Why?" He squeezed her hand tighter. "Because I never let my guard down. And when it comes to you, my daughter, I'll never stop watching, never stop protecting. You've already endured the worst. From this day forward, I will dedicate every breath I have to keeping you safe. That's my promise." Anna's lips trembled, her tears spilling freely again. She collapsed against his shoulder, sobbing into his chest like a little girl. Robert held her tightly, stroking her hair, whispering, "You're not alone, Anna. You never will be. Not while I'm alive." For a long while, they stayed like that, father and daughter bound by grief, but also by unbreakable love. It wasn't the kind of comfort that erased pain, but it was enough to plant a fragile seed of hope. Later that night, Robert drove her back to his home, a place she hadn't lived since her teenage years. The familiar creak of the front door, the scent of her mother's old roses still lingering in the hallway, wrapped her in bittersweet memories. "From now on, you'll stay here," Robert said firmly as he set her suitcase down. "This is your home again. No one will touch you here." Anna nodded silently, her eyes scanning the living room where countless childhood memories lingered. For the first time in months, she felt a flicker of safety, of warmth. But as Robert tucked her into bed that night, his mind replayed Mark's last words in the courtroom. "Prison can't hold me forever." He brushed a strand of hair from Anna's forehead and whispered, "Sleep, my girl. I'll keep watch." Yet even as he stood guard, Robert couldn't shake the gnawing thought. What if Mark's threats weren't empty? What if his reach could extend even beyond prison walls? Weeks passed after the sentencing, but for Anna, time felt frozen. Each morning she woke in her father's home, surrounded by the familiar walls of her childhood. Yet nothing felt the same. The house was safe, yes, but her heart was a battlefield where hope and despair clashed endlessly. Her days blurred together. She spent hours staring out the window at the garden her mother once tended, watching the roses bloom and wither. She barely ate, barely spoke. The once bright woman who dreamed of being a mother was gone, replaced by someone hollow, someone who carried only memories of pain. Her father tried to bring her comfort. Robert would sit with her at the breakfast table, gently urging her to eat. "Anna, you have to take care of yourself," he'd say, his voice soft but firm. But she only pushed food around her plate, whispering, "What's the point?" At night, the nightmares came. She woke drenched in sweat, her hands clutching her belly, convinced she could still hear her baby's heartbeat fading away. She screamed sometimes, startling Robert awake from his own restless sleep. He rushed to her room each time, holding her until the tremors passed. "It's over, Anna," he whispered, though he knew the truth. For her, it wasn't over at all. The loss of her child was a wound that refused to heal. Every time she saw a mother pushing a stroller on the street, her chest ached. Every time she heard the faint cry of a baby, her hands shook. She avoided parks, avoided people, avoided life itself. Love, once something she believed in so fiercely, now felt like a cruel illusion. She replayed the moments with Mark, his early smiles, his promises, his vows of forever, and then the boiling coffee, the insults, the betrayal with Claire. Trust had become poison. How could she ever believe in another man's love when the last one had destroyed her so completely? One evening, Robert found her sitting in the dark living room, staring at the empty cradle she had brought from her apartment. She had insisted on keeping it, even though it tore her apart. "Anna," he said softly, kneeling beside her, "you can't keep punishing yourself like this. You're not to blame." Her voice cracked. "But I failed, Dad. I couldn't protect my baby. I couldn't even see what kind of man Mark really was. How could I be so blind?" Robert gripped her hands tightly. "No, the failure was his, not yours. You loved, Anna. You trusted. That's not weakness, that's humanity. Don't let his evil steal your future too." But Anna only shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "I don't have a future. Love killed me once. I won't let it kill me again." Robert's chest tightened, but he knew pushing her too hard would only deepen her despair. He kissed her forehead and whispered, "Time will heal, Anna, and when you're ready, the right person will prove love isn't the enemy." She closed her eyes, sinking into silence. She didn't believe him. Not yet. But what neither of them knew was that fate was already preparing someone to step into her shattered world. Because sometimes healing begins when you least expect it. And with the last person you'd ever imagine. And soon, Anna's path would cross with the man who would change everything. It was another quiet morning in Robert's house. Anna sat by the window, a blanket wrapped tightly around her shoulders, staring blankly at the garden outside. Her father had left early for work, but before leaving, he had promised to send someone to check on her. She didn't argue. She rarely did these days. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway broke her trance. Moments later, the doorbell rang. Reluctantly, Anna shuffled to the door and opened it. Standing there was a man she vaguely recognized. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a tailored suit, his dark hair neatly combed back. His eyes, however, were not stern like most men she had met. They were kind, patient, searching. "Anna?" he asked softly, his voice calm and warm. "I'm Daniel Hayes. I work with your father at the precinct. He asked me to stop by to make sure you're doing all right." Anna hesitated, her fingers tightening on the edge of the door. I don't need anyone checking on me." Her voice was defensive, fragile. Daniel gave a small nod, not offended. "I understand. I won't stay if you don't want me to. I just thought maybe you could use some company, or at least a distraction." He offered a gentle smile. Something about his tone, steady, unhurried, made it difficult for Anna to slam the door. Against her own instincts, she stepped aside. "Fine, just for a little while." Inside, Daniel didn't pry. He didn't ask about Mark or the trial. Instead, he noticed the stack of unopened mail on the counter and quietly began sorting it, setting bills aside and discarding junk mail. He walked to the kitchen, filled the kettle, and asked, "Would you like some tea?" Anna blinked. No man had ever moved through her space so respectfully, so naturally. She almost said no, but the words caught in her throat. "Yes. Thank you." As the kettle whistled, Daniel spoke about small things. The traffic that morning, a new case at the precinct that wasn't nearly as dramatic as the newspapers made it sound. He even joked about how Robert, despite his tough exterior, was notorious for sneaking donuts into morning briefings. For the first time in weeks, A faint smile tugged at Anna's lips. When he noticed, Daniel didn't point it out. He simply set the tea in front of her and said, "There, a little warmth never hurts." They sat in silence for a while, sipping tea. It wasn't uncomfortable, it was peaceful. Something Anna hadn't felt in a long time. Finally, Daniel stood. "I'll stop bothering you, but I'll check in again tomorrow if that's all right. Not because your father asked, because I'd like to." Anna's instinct was to say no, to keep her walls high, but instead she found herself nodding. "Okay." Daniel's smile deepened just slightly before he left. As the door closed, Anna sank back into her chair, confused by the warmth spreading through her chest. She told herself it was nothing, just politeness. She couldn't risk opening her heart again. But deep down, she knew Daniel wasn't like the others. He carried something different. Patience, strength, and sincerity. And though she tried to deny it, part of her wondered, could this man be the one to help her believe in love again? The days that followed were different. Subtle at first, but different. Daniel kept his word. Each morning his car pulled into the driveway and he appeared at the door with the same calm smile, never pushing, never intruding. Sometimes he brought groceries. Sometimes he carried a book he thought Anna might like. Other times he came with nothing at all but his presence. And that, strangely, was enough. At first, Anna resisted. Her answers were short, her eyes wary. She kept her distance, afraid of trusting anyone again, especially a man. But Daniel never seemed offended. If she didn't want to talk, he filled the silence with stories about the precinct, light-hearted anecdotes about her father's grumpy mornings, or the silly mistakes rookies made on the job. One afternoon, as he helped her water the roses in the garden, he shared a memory of his own. "My mother used to say flowers are like people. If you give them patience and care, they bloom. If you neglect them, they wither." Anna looked at him, her lips parting slightly. For weeks, she had felt like one of those withering roses, and yet with Daniel standing beside her, she felt a flicker of something she thought was gone, life. Still, she tried to guard herself. "I don't bloom anymore," she said softly, her voice laced with sadness. Daniel's reply was gentle but firm. "You will. Not today, not tomorrow, but you will." Those words lingered with her long after he left. Another day, he found her sitting on the porch, lost in thought. Without a word, he handed her a sketchbook and pencils. "I noticed you like to doodle on receipts and napkins. Maybe try something bigger?" Anna hesitated, then opened the book. Her hands trembled as she began to draw. The first time in months she had done something that wasn't just surviving. By the time she looked up, Daniel was sitting quietly nearby, sipping coffee, not watching her like a project, but simply being there. That night, Anna caught herself smiling at the sketch she had made. A fragile smile, but real, and slowly, those moments multiplied. Daniel teased her gently about her terrible taste in TV shows. He pretended to be offended when she laughed at his clumsy attempts to cook dinner. He never forced joy on her, but he created space for it, like opening curtains to let the sunlight in. One evening, as they sat in the living room, Daniel said something that pierced her walls. "Anna, you're stronger than you think. What you've endured would have broken most people. But here you are, still standing. That's something worth being proud of." Anna's eyes filled with tears, but for the first time they weren't just tears of pain. She whispered, "Thank you for seeing me." Daniel gave her a small nod, his voice quiet. "Always." In that moment, Anna realized she was laughing more often, smiling more easily, breathing more freely. Daniel hadn't healed her scars, but he had reminded her they didn't define her. And yet, just as warmth began to return to her heart, a shadow lingered at the edge of her life. For while Daniel's presence brought light, Mark's darkness had not vanished, and soon it would try to seep back in. Robert had seen a lot in his years on the force. Liars, manipulators, men who put on masks to hide their darkness. But he had also learned to read people, to see through the layers they presented to the world. And every time Daniel walked into his home, every time he watched how the younger man interacted with Anna, Robert felt something rare. Trust. One Saturday afternoon, Robert returned home earlier than expected. He paused in the hallway, unnoticed, as he saw Daniel in the kitchen with Anna. Daniel was clumsily trying to whisk pancake batter while Anna laughed, an honest, unguarded laugh that Robert hadn't heard from his daughter in months. For a moment, Robert's eyes misted. That laugh reminded him of the girl she used to be before Mark, before the tragedy. The sound filled the house like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. When Anna stepped away to answer a phone call, Robert entered the kitchen. Daniel straightened immediately, almost nervously. "Sir, I was just—" Robert held up a hand. "Relax, Daniel. You don't have to explain. I know what you're doing here." Daniel looked uneasy. "I'm not trying to overstep. I just care about her. More than I expected, honestly." Robert studied him carefully, his voice calm but firm. "Do you know what Anna has been through? Do you understand the depth of the scars she carries?" Daniel nodded solemnly. "I do, and I don't want to erase those scars or pretend they don't exist. I just want to stand beside her, however long it takes, however hard it gets." Those words carried weight. They weren't dramatic promises. They were steady, grounded, like the man himself. Robert felt his chest tighten, a mixture of relief and emotion. Anna needs someone who won't run when it gets hard. She's been abandoned, betrayed, broken. If you ever add to that pain, Daniel, you'll answer to me, not as her father, but as a man who has nothing left to lose. Daniel met his gaze without flinching. "I'd never hurt her, sir. Not in this lifetime." Robert's stern expression softened slightly. For the first time in years, he felt like maybe his daughter wasn't doomed to carry her pain alone. He gave Daniel a small nod. "Then don't give up on her. Even when she tries to push you away. She's scared, but she needs someone who won't walk out." Anna returned just then, looking between them suspiciously. "What are you two talking about?" Robert smiled faintly, covering his emotions. "Just telling Daniel he makes terrible pancakes." Daniel chuckled nervously, while Anna rolled her eyes. "They're not that bad," she teased, but her cheeks flushed slightly. Later that night, Robert knocked gently on Anna's door. She was sketching again, something she hadn't done in months. He sat beside her, his voice low. "Sweetheart, not all men are like Mark. Some men honor their word. Some men truly love. Daniel might be one of them." Anna froze, her pencil trembling. Her heart raced at the thought, but fear still held her back. "Dad, I can't. I'm not ready. What if I let him in and it destroys me again?" Robert took her hand gently, his eyes soft but resolute. "Then let me believe for you until you're ready. Don't close the door completely. Give yourself permission to hope again." Anna's eyes watered as she whispered, "Hope feels dangerous." Robert kissed her forehead, whispering, "Sometimes hope is the only thing that saves us." What Anna didn't know was that hope was about to be tested, because a letter was already on its way, carrying Mark's name from inside prison. The weeks passed gently, and with them Anna's walls began to lower. It wasn't sudden, like a door flung wide open. It was gradual, like sunlight filtering through curtains, warming a room she thought would remain cold forever. Daniel remained steady through it all. He never pushed, never demanded. He simply showed up, whether it was to cook a simple dinner, walk with her through the garden, or just sit in silence when words were too heavy. His presence was a constant reminder that not every man's love was a weapon. One crisp autumn afternoon, they walked through the park near Robert's house. Leaves crunched under their feet, the air smelled faintly of pine, and for once, Anna wasn't drowning in memories of pain. She found herself watching Daniel as he spoke about his childhood, about fishing trips with his grandfather, about how he had joined the police force to make a difference. "You're lucky," Anna said softly, her eyes on the ground. "You had people who believed in you." Daniel glanced at her, his expression tender. "And you didn't?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "Mark never believed in me. He only tore me down. Even when I carried his child, he made me feel worthless. I thought love was supposed to build you up. I was wrong." Daniel stopped walking. He turned to her, his voice steady but full of emotion. "Anna, you weren't wrong. Love is supposed to build you up. You just gave your heart to the wrong man. Don't let his cruelty rewrite what love is meant to be." Her throat tightened, tears threatening. "And what is it meant to be?" she whispered. Daniel stepped closer, his voice lowering. "It's meant to be safe. It's meant to be patient. It's meant to make you feel seen, not invisible. If you let me, I want to show you what that feels like." Her breath caught, her chest rising and falling quickly. For a moment, she wanted to run. Fear screamed at her to shut down, to protect herself. But then she saw his eyes, steady, unwavering, filled not with hunger or control, but with respect and care. and for the first time in years, Anna allowed herself to hope. That evening, back at the house, Robert noticed the change. The way Anna smiled a little longer, the way Daniel's hand brushed against hers without her pulling away. He said nothing, but his heart swelled with quiet relief. Later, on the porch under the soft glow of the moon, Daniel finally spoke what had been in his heart all along. "Anna, I'm falling in love with you. Not the broken pieces, not just the pain, but all of you. And I'll wait as long as it takes for you to believe it." Tears spilled down her cheeks, but she didn't turn away. She whispered, her voice trembling, I think I'm falling too." Their hands intertwined, fragile but real, marking the start of something new. But just as Anna allowed herself this fragile happiness, Robert walked out holding an envelope. His face was pale, his voice grave. "Anna, this letter came from the prison today." He handed it to her. The sender's name burned her eyes. It was from Mark. The day of the wedding was nothing like the one Anna had once imagined as a young girl. There were no glittering chandeliers, no grand halls, no endless rows of guests. Instead, it was held in the small church her mother used to take her to as a child, a place filled not with extravagance but with peace. Anna stood in front of the mirror inside the modest dressing room. Her gown was simple, ivory with lace sleeves, not too flashy, not too heavy. She had chosen it that way, because this wasn't about spectacle. This was about starting again. Her fingers brushed the fabric nervously, her reflection almost unrecognizable. For the first time in years, she looked not broken, but whole. Robert entered quietly, his eyes softening as he saw her. For a long moment he didn't speak, just looked at his daughter, tears glistening in his eyes. "You look like your mother," he finally whispered, his voice thick. Anna's lips trembled into a small smile. "Do you think she'd be proud of me, Dad?" Robert stepped forward, kissing her forehead gently. "She'd be proud beyond words, and so am I. You survived the darkest storm and found your way back to the light. Today isn't just about a wedding, it's about reclaiming your life." Outside, the church was filled with only close friends, fellow officers, and a handful of neighbors who had supported Anna through her pain. At the altar stood Daniel, his suit neat, his eyes locked on the door where he knew Anna would appear. His hands trembled slightly, not from nerves about marriage, but from the overwhelming gratitude that she had chosen to walk toward him. When the music began, the doors opened, and Anna walked down the aisle on her father's arm. The room seemed to hold its breath. Robert's chest swelled with pride, every step a reminder that he was giving his daughter away, not in fear, but in faith. Daniel's eyes filled with tears as she drew closer. To him, she wasn't a victim anymore. She was strength, beauty, and resilience embodied. When they finally stood together, the pastor's words faded into the background. It felt like the world had shrunk to just the two of them. Daniel squeezed her hand gently, whispering, "You're safe with me, always." Anna's eyes glistened, her voice steady but emotional. "And I choose you, Daniel. Not because I'm afraid, not because I'm broken, but because with you, I finally feel whole again." The vows were spoken, the rings exchanged. When the pastor declared them husband and wife, the room erupted with applause. But for Anna, the loudest sound was the quiet beating of her own heart, steady, hopeful, alive. Robert wiped his tears discreetly as he watched them kiss. His daughter, once shattered, now stood in the arms of a man who would cherish her. For the first time since tragedy had struck, Robert felt at peace. The reception was small, filled with laughter and clinking glasses. Anna danced with her father, then with her new husband, each step a declaration that the past no longer owned her. But as the night wound down and the couple prepared to leave, Robert received a call. His face darkened as he listened, then glanced toward Anna and Daniel, who were laughing together under the glow of lanterns. He hung up the phone, his jaw clenched. The message was clear and chilling. Mark had escaped from prison. Weeks after the wedding, the house was filled with a warmth Anna hadn't felt in years. Laughter echoed through the halls. The scent of home-cooked meals lingered in the kitchen, and for once she woke each morning not with dread, but with gratitude. Daniel had kept every promise. He was attentive, gentle, and unwavering. He never raised his voice, never made her feel small. Instead, he celebrated her, reminding her each day that she was more than her scars. Robert, too, seemed lighter now, often joining them for dinner, smiling more than he had in a long time. Then, one morning, Anna stood in the bathroom staring at a small test in her trembling hands. Two pink lines stared back at her. For a long moment, she couldn't breathe. Her heart pounded, her knees buckled, and she sank onto the edge of the bathtub. Pregnant. The word filled her with both terror and joy. Memories of her first pregnancy, the excitement that turned to horror, rushed back, but this time was different. This time she wasn't alone. She had Daniel. She had her father. She had safety. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she whispered, "My baby, we're going to do this right this time." When she told Daniel that evening, his reaction was immediate and overwhelming. His eyes widened, then filled with tears. He pulled her into his arms, laughing through his sobs. "Anna, this is the greatest gift you could give me. I promise you, I will protect both of you with everything I have." Anna clung to him, sobbing into his chest. "I'm scared, Daniel. What if something goes wrong again?" He cupped her face, his voice steady. "Nothing will go wrong. Not this time. We'll go to every appointment together. We'll prepare for every possibility. And no matter what happens, you'll never face it alone." Robert's reaction was just as emotional. When Anna told him, his eyes filled with tears he didn't bother to hide. He hugged her tightly, whispering, "I lost one grandchild, Anna, but I won't lose another. This child will grow up safe, loved, and proud of the woman who brought them into the world." For the first time, hope didn't feel like a dangerous dream. It felt real. The nursery was repainted, baby clothes folded neatly into drawers. Daniel often placed his hand on her belly, talking to the baby as if they could already hear him. At night, Anna fell asleep to the sound of his steady breathing, comforted in ways she had never known before. But peace is fragile. Late one evening, as Daniel and Anna sat on the porch sipping tea, Robert arrived unexpectedly. His face was tense, his eyes sharp. He sat down heavily, looking at them both. "I haven't wanted to burden you," he began, his voice low, "but you need to know the truth. Mark escaped from prison 3 weeks ago. We've been tracking him, but he's gone off the grid." Anna's teacup slipped from her hand, shattering on the wooden porch. Her breath came in short gasps, her hands instinctively wrapping around her belly. Daniel wrapped an arm around her shoulders, his jaw set like stone. "He won't touch her. He won't touch our child. I'll die before I let that happen." And though Robert placed a reassuring hand on his daughter's knee, his words carried the weight of a storm. "Mark is coming. It's only a matter of time." The months passed in a blur of tension and hope. Robert doubled security around the house, never allowing Anna to be alone. Daniel stayed close, his protective instincts heightened by the knowledge that Mark was out there somewhere, waiting. But amid the shadow of fear, life still grew inside Anna. A heartbeat stronger each day, reminding them all that hope was more powerful than hate. The night came when Anna went into labor. The storm outside rattled the windows, rain lashing against the roof. But inside the hospital, the world narrowed to one room where she clutched Daniel's hand with every contraction. "You're doing amazing," Daniel whispered, brushing sweat-soaked hair from her forehead. His voice was calm, but his eyes glistened with tears. "Just a little longer, love. Just a little longer." Robert stood at the corner of the room, his uniform still on, pacing like a man preparing for battle. He had faced armed criminals and walked through fire, but watching his daughter fight for life again tested every fiber of his strength. "You've got this, Anna," he whispered. "Your mother would be so proud." Hours later, a cry pierced the room, the sound of new life. The doctor smiled, lifting the tiny, wriggling baby into Anna's arms. "Congratulations, it's a girl." Anna's sobs broke free as she cradled her daughter against her chest. Her tears fell onto the baby's soft skin, each drop a mixture of sorrow for the child she had lost and gratitude for the one she now held. "My baby," she whispered, her voice trembling with joy. "You're safe, you're loved, you're ours." Daniel bent low, kissing both Anna and the baby, his tears soaking her hair. "You've made me the happiest man alive." Robert finally stepped forward, his tough exterior crumbling. He touched the baby's tiny hand, his voice breaking. "Welcome, little one. You'll never know the kind of darkness your mother endured, not while I breathe." For the first time in years, the weight of grief lifted from the room. Love and new beginnings filled the space where despair had once lived. Days later, the family gathered back at Robert's house. The nursery, painted in soft yellow, glowed with warmth. Anna sat in the rocking chair, her daughter nestled in her arms. Daniel stood beside her, one hand on her shoulder, the other resting gently on their child. Robert leaned against the doorway, his heart swelling with pride. The threat of Mark lingered, yes, but Robert had vowed he would never reach them. And deep down, Anna knew that this time her family was stronger than any shadow from the past. As the baby yawned and curled into sleep, Anna looked up at Daniel and Robert. "I thought my life was over. I thought love was nothing but pain. But now I see it differently. Love is healing. Love is strength. Love gave me you too, and now her." Daniel kissed her forehead tenderly. "And love will protect you forever." Robert nodded, his voice steady but emotional. "Justice was served, Anna, but this is the real victory. You survived. You rose again. And now you have everything you deserve." The house was quiet except for the steady breathing of the newborn. Outside, the storm had cleared, leaving the night sky scattered with stars. And in that moment, Anna knew her story had come full circle. Not defined by tragedy, but by triumph. Because no shadow, no pain, no man could ever take this happiness from her again. All right, my friend, so here we are, at the end of Anna's journey. And if you're still with me right now, it means this story touched you in some way. Maybe it reminded you of your own struggles, or of someone you love who has been through pain. What Anna's story shows us is simple but powerful. Suffering does not define us. Our response does. Like the Stoic philosopher Epictetus once said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." Anna lost everything, yet she rose again. She found healing in love, strength in family, and peace in resilience. And maybe that's a reminder for us all, that even in the darkest nights, we can choose not to let bitterness win. So if this story moved you, don't just keep it inside. Share it with someone who needs hope today. And of course, like this video, subscribe, and join our family, because together we can keep telling stories that heal hearts and change lives. The courtroom was packed, the air so tense it felt like a storm was about to break. Lawyers shuffled papers, journalists whispered to one another, and the crowd leaned forward in their seats, waiting for the scandal everyone in New York had been talking about. At the center of it all sat Claire Bennett, a young attorney whose hands rested protectively over her swollen belly. Her face was pale but composed, the quiet strength of a woman who had already endured more pain than anyone could imagine. Across from her, Vanessa Monroe lounged with a smirk, her designer dress gleaming under the bright lights. She wasn't just David Carter's mistress, she was his weapon, a woman who thrived on humiliating Claire. And today, in front of an audience that included reporters and curious onlookers, she was about to go too far. The judge entered the room, his black robe flowing behind him. He was stern, unreadable, and no one in the room knew the secret that tied him to Claire. For now, he was just Judge William Carter, the man appointed to oversee a bitter divorce case. As the proceedings began, whispers filled the gallery. David sat coldly at Vanessa's side, refusing to even glance at the woman carrying his child. The betrayal was complete, and everyone could see it. Claire, despite the pain tearing through her, kept her head high. She believed that dignity was her last defense. Then it happened. Vanessa leaned forward, her voice dripping with venom as she mocked Claire's pregnancy, questioning whether David should even be responsible for the child. Gasps filled the room, but before anyone could react, Vanessa's hand flew across the table. The sharp crack of the slap echoed through the courtroom, stunning everyone into silence. Claire staggered, her hand instinctively clutching her stomach as tears welled in her eyes. The bailiff froze, unsure if he should intervene. The crowd erupted in shocked murmurs. Phones lifted into the air as people recorded the scandal, the slap already destined to go viral within minutes. Claire's face burned, her heart raced, and for the first time, she looked as if she might break. But the most shocking part had yet to come. Because the judge sitting above them, the man who seemed like just another cold authority figure, was not just the arbiter of justice in this trial. He was her father. And as his knuckles whitened around the gavel, the truth simmered beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to explode. What no one knew was that the slap was only the beginning, and the judge's hidden connection to Claire would change everything. Before the world saw her as the pregnant woman humiliated in a courtroom, Claire Bennett had been a symbol of quiet determination. Born and raised in New Jersey, she wasn't handed privilege on a silver platter. She fought her way through law school, taking night classes while working full-time at a small firm. Her colleagues admired her discipline, but what truly defined Claire was her heart. She believed in fairness, in helping those who couldn't defend themselves, and in love. Perhaps too much in love. When she met David Carter, he seemed like a dream. Charming, wealthy, and ambitious, David swept her off her feet. Friends warned her that he was too smooth, too practiced with his words, but Claire chose to believe in the man behind the polished smile. Against all odds, they married. For a while, life seemed perfect. They had a beautiful apartment in Manhattan, dinners under soft city lights, and endless promises about the future. Then came the happiest news of her life. She was pregnant. Claire imagined a family where love would thrive, where her child would grow up in warmth and stability. She decorated a small room in their home, folding tiny clothes with trembling hands, already envisioning the laughter that would fill the space. For the first time in years, she let herself feel safe. But safety, as Claire would discover, was an illusion. Slowly, David changed. He grew distant, spending late nights at the office. He ignored her texts, dismissed her questions, and when he did come home, he smelled of expensive perfume that wasn't hers. The truth arrived in brutal fragments. Whispers from acquaintances, receipts left carelessly in pockets, and finally, Vanessa Monroe. Vanessa was everything Claire wasn't. Bold, flashy, and unafraid of cruelty. Where Claire was modest, Vanessa flaunted. Where Claire sought respect, Vanessa craved dominance. And David, blinded by vanity and temptation, fell willingly into her trap. The betrayal shattered Claire, but she never showed it in public. She carried her pain silently, protecting her unborn child from stress. She told herself that dignity mattered, that her baby deserved a mother who stood tall even when her world was crumbling. Nights alone, however, she cried into her pillow, whispering apologies to the life growing inside her. Apologies for choosing the wrong man. And so, when the divorce papers came, Claire didn't fight them. She believed her silence was strength, but in reality, she was walking into the lion's den, where Vanessa's cruelty and David's coldness would be displayed for everyone to see. The courtroom wasn't just about property or custody. It was about humiliation, reputation, and the stripping away of Claire's last defenses. Yet even in her most fragile state, Claire's story was far from over. Because hidden in the shadows of the courtroom sat one man whose heart still beat for her, a man who had more power than anyone else in the room. What Claire didn't know was that her greatest ally was sitting on the judge's bench, silently watching and waiting. Before betrayal poisoned her life, Claire Bennett had once lived in what seemed like a fairy tale. When she first married David Carter, her days were filled with moments that felt too good to be real. They spent weekends walking through Central Park, sipping hot chocolate in winter, or riding bicycles under the summer sun. David, always polished and confident, held her hand with the ease of a man who seemed devoted. To the outside world, they were the perfect couple. A rising attorney and a successful businessman building a life together in Manhattan. Their apartment on the Upper East Side was filled with light, laughter, and dreams. Claire decorated it with simple touches, a vase of fresh flowers on the dining table, family photos lining the hallway, and stacks of her law books scattered across the living room. David often teased her about working too much, but she loved that he pretended to care. She believed they were building something lasting, a foundation that could weather anything. On their second anniversary, David surprised her with a weekend getaway to Napa Valley. Claire remembered the vineyard's golden sunsets, the clinking of glasses, and the whispered promises David made beneath the stars. He told her they would grow old together, that she was his forever. Claire believed him. She had no reason not to. When she found out she was pregnant, her joy overflowed. She shared the news with David one quiet evening after dinner, handing him a tiny pair of baby shoes she had bought in secret. For a moment, his eyes softened. He hugged her, kissed her forehead, and told her he was ready to be a father. Claire's heart swelled with hope. She began to imagine a nursery, family holidays, and bedtime stories. But looking back, the cracks had already begun to show. David's phone calls that ended abruptly, his vague explanations for late nights at the office, his sudden disinterest in family conversations, all were warning signs Claire ignored. She thought he was just stressed, that work demanded too much of him. She told herself love required patience, that once the baby arrived, everything would settle. She smiled through loneliness, held on to promises that faded like smoke, and clung to the image of the man she had married. Even when she found a lipstick stain on his collar, she convinced herself it was a misunderstanding. After all, David had sworn loyalty to her. He was her husband, the father of her child. But the truth was waiting in the shadows, and the fairy tale was already unraveling. Claire had no idea that the woman who would destroy her marriage was not only in David's life, but was preparing to step boldly into her own. The perfect world Claire thought she had built was about to collapse, and the face of betrayal would soon reveal itself. Vanessa Monroe did not enter Claire Bennett's life quietly. She stormed into it, bold and unapologetic, like a woman who believed the world owed her everything. Where Claire carried herself with modest grace, Vanessa radiated arrogance. She wore the kind of clothes that announced her presence before she spoke. Designer dresses that clung tightly, heels that clicked like a drumbeat of defiance. And when she finally revealed herself, she didn't do it in secret shadows. She did it publicly, with venom. Claire's first encounter with Vanessa wasn't in a whispered rumor or an anonymous text. It was at a charity gala, one Claire had attended with David, glowing with the pride of an expectant mother. She remembered adjusting her dress to cover her growing belly, smiling at guests, and believing that the man by her side was still hers. Then Vanessa appeared. She was stunning, of course, long dark hair cascading over her shoulders, eyes that sparkled with mischief, and lips curved in a smile that didn't hide its cruelty. She walked straight to David, touched his arm as though she had every right, and looked Claire up and down with a smirk. "David," Vanessa purred, "aren't you going to introduce me?" Claire froze, her pulse hammering in her ears. David hesitated for a second, then gave the introduction no wife ever wants to hear. "Claire, this is Vanessa, a friend from work." But Vanessa wasn't interested in playing subtle. Leaning closer, she whispered just loud enough for Claire to hear. "Not just a friend." The words cut sharper than any blade. Claire tried to hold herself together, her smile trembling as she excused herself to the restroom. She locked the door and pressed a hand over her stomach, whispering to her unborn child that everything would be okay. But deep down, she knew something had shattered. From that night on, Vanessa no longer stayed in the shadows. She called David during dinners, sent him gifts brazenly wrapped in gold ribbon, and even posted cryptic photos on social media that hinted at their relationship. Every move was calculated, designed to humiliate Claire and force her into silence. People began to whisper. Friends who once praised Claire's perfect marriage now looked at her with pity. Colleagues exchanged glances, wondering how the strong attorney had lost control of her own home. And through it all, Vanessa thrived. She fed on Claire's pain, twisting the knife deeper every chance she got. David, weak and intoxicated by Vanessa's boldness, allowed it. He stopped hiding. He no longer cared who saw him with her, no longer respected the vows he had once sworn. For Claire, every day became a battlefield. Every glance from Vanessa, a reminder that her life was unraveling. But what she didn't know yet was that Vanessa's cruelty was only beginning, and soon it would reach a stage so public that no one could ignore it. The mistress wasn't satisfied with stealing Claire's husband. She wanted to destroy her completely, and the next strike would happen in the most humiliating place of all. Pregnancy was supposed to be the safest, most beautiful chapter of Claire Bennett's life. She dreamed of soft lullabies, late-night cravings that made her laugh, and tender conversations with David about baby names. But instead of love and security, she found herself living in a nightmare, one discovery at a time. It began with small cracks in the illusion. David started coming home late, offering excuses that felt rehearsed. "The office is drowning in work," he'd mutter, loosening his tie as he poured himself a drink. Claire wanted to believe him. She told herself stress could change a man, that the father of her child wouldn't betray her. But the doubts refused to stay buried. One evening, she stumbled upon the truth in the most painful way. While doing laundry, she pulled a crisp white shirt from David's suitcase. At first she thought nothing of it, until her eyes landed on the faint trace of lipstick smeared on the collar. Not her shade, not her mark. Her heart dropped. She clutched the shirt as tears blurred her vision. For the sake of her baby, she bit her tongue and pretended not to notice. But inside, something cracked. Days later, the cracks widened. A hotel receipt fell from David's jacket pocket. The date matched a night he had told her he was working late. The charges were for champagne, a suite, and luxury spa services. Claire stood frozen in the kitchen, staring at the slip of paper as if it were a death sentence. Her worst fears were confirmed when she saw a message flash on David's phone while he showered. It was from Vanessa. "Last night was unforgettable. Can't wait for round 2. Claire's trembling hands nearly dropped the phone. Her stomach twisted, not from pregnancy, but from betrayal so raw it stole her breath. That night, Claire sat alone in the nursery, surrounded by unopened boxes of baby furniture. She ran her hand over the soft fabric of a crib blanket and whispered to her unborn child, "I'm sorry. I didn't know your father would be this man, but I promise, I will protect you." Her tears soaked the tiny blanket, a silent vow born out of heartbreak. David, meanwhile, showed no remorse. He grew colder, more distant, and when Claire finally confronted him, his response was a dagger to her chest. "You're imagining things. Don't make a scene, Claire. You're too emotional because of the pregnancy." His gaslighting cut deeper than the lies themselves. But Claire wasn't imagining. The lipstick, the receipts, the messages, everything screamed the truth. The man she had trusted with her future was no longer hers. Still, she swallowed her pain. For her child, she chose silence. She carried the burden alone, walking through her days with a smile that hid the storm inside her. But the storm was only growing stronger, and soon it would break in front of everyone. Claire thought she had seen the worst of David's betrayal, but the humiliation waiting for her in public would tear her world apart. Claire Bennett had always been known for her composure. Even in law school, when exams piled up and classmates crumbled under pressure, she carried herself with quiet strength. But nothing had prepared her for the silent war she now faced inside her own marriage. Pregnant, betrayed, and humiliated, she endured every wound in silence, because her child's well-being mattered more than her own broken heart. Her days became a performance. Each morning, she rose from bed, fixed her hair, and smiled at the world as though nothing was wrong. At work, she buried herself in case files, convincing her colleagues she was fine. When asked about David, she forced a practiced grin and replied, "He's busy, but we're doing well." Lies slipped from her lips with ease, not because she wanted to deceive, but because she couldn't bear to let the world see her shame. Nights, however, were different. Alone in their Manhattan apartment, she curled up on the couch with her hands over her stomach, whispering to her unborn baby. She told stories about the future, about birthdays and family vacations, about laughter that would one day fill their empty home. Her voice trembled, but she forced hope into every word. The loneliness was unbearable. Claire longed for a partner's touch, for David to sit beside her and marvel at the tiny kicks she felt beneath her skin. Instead, she often woke to find his side of the bed cold, his phone buzzing with messages he refused to explain. The sound of his laughter, muffled behind closed doors as he whispered to Vanessa, became knives twisting into her soul. Worse than the betrayal was the isolation. Claire's pride kept her from confiding in friends or family. She couldn't bear the pitying stares, the whispered judgments. She told herself that enduring in silence was strength, but deep down she was crumbling. The stress gnawed at her body, leaving her exhausted, her face pale, her heart heavy with fear. One evening, as she folded baby clothes in the nursery, she caught her reflection in the mirror. Dark circles under her eyes, shoulders slumped, smile faded. She hardly recognized herself. For a moment, despair consumed her. She pressed her face into the soft fabric of a onesie and sobbed, her tears soaking the tiny garment. "I have to be strong for you," she whispered to her baby, "even if it kills me inside." Every sacrifice she made was for her child. Every silence she kept was for the fragile life growing within her. Yet, the weight of unspoken pain was crushing her, threatening to break the very strength she clung to. Still, Claire endured. She chose dignity over revenge, restraint over rage. But the walls she had built around her pain were not unshakable. and when the betrayal finally spilled into the public eye, those walls would shatter in front of everyone. The day was coming when Claire's silent suffering would no longer stay hidden, and the world would witness her humiliation firsthand. The papers arrived one gray morning, delivered by a stern-faced courier who refused to meet Claire's eyes. She opened the envelope with trembling hands, and there it was in black and white. David had filed for divorce. The man who had once promised her forever now sought to erase her, to strip her of the life they had built together. And the cruelest detail of all? His petition requested sole control of their assets, leaving Claire with nothing but her unborn child. Claire sat at the kitchen table, her hand resting protectively on her belly. She wanted to scream, to tear the papers apart, but she couldn't risk stressing the baby. Instead, she folded the documents neatly, as if order could somehow tame the chaos inside her. When she confronted David, his coldness chilled her more than the betrayal itself. He stood in their living room, arms crossed, eyes void of emotion. "It's better this way," he said flatly. "You'll get a settlement. Don't drag this out, Claire. It'll only make you look pathetic." Her voice broke as she asked, "After everything, after our child, this is what you want?" But David didn't even flinch. "Vanessa makes me happy. You don't anymore." The words shattered what little strength she had left. And as if twisting the knife deeper, Vanessa herself appeared days later, strutting into the apartment Claire once called home. She wore a smug smile, her arm linked with David's, as though she were already the rightful wife. "Don't take it personally, Claire," Vanessa sneered. "Some women just aren't meant to keep a man like David." The humiliation was unbearable, yet Claire swallowed her pride, retreating into silence once again. She told herself the courtroom would be her chance to finally defend her dignity, to stand for herself and her child. She began gathering what little evidence she had, receipts, messages, small fragments of truth. But Vanessa was already ahead of her. She paraded around town on David's arm, attending parties, posing for photographs, letting everyone know she had won. The gossip columns buzzed with speculation, painting Claire as the bitter, discarded wife, while Vanessa basked in the role of the victorious mistress. The night before the hearing, Claire sat alone in her apartment. She held her baby's ultrasound picture in her hands, her tears falling onto the glossy paper. "I will fight for us," she whispered. "Even if I have nothing left, I will fight." Outside, the city lights glittered, indifferent to her pain. Somewhere across town, Vanessa and David celebrated, sipping champagne, laughing at Claire's supposed weakness. They thought they had already crushed her spirit. But the courtroom had its own rules, and not everything was as it seemed. Neither David nor Vanessa knew that the judge presiding over the case carried a secret that would soon turn their triumph into devastation. The day of the hearing arrived, and the courthouse in downtown Manhattan buzzed like a hive. Crowds gathered outside, journalists elbowing one another for the best spot as cameras flashed and microphones were thrust forward. The story of David Carter, his pregnant wife Claire Bennett, and the glamorous mistress Vanessa Monroe had already become a headline in every major paper. By the time Claire stepped out of the cab, the scandal had reached millions of eyes and ears. Reporters shouted her name. "Claire, how does it feel to be abandoned during pregnancy? Do you think David will win custody of the assets? Are you ready to face Vanessa in court?" Each question felt like an arrow, sharp and merciless. Claire kept her head down, clutching her coat around her belly, shielding herself from the storm of attention. Inside, the atmosphere was no less suffocating. The gallery was filled with curious onlookers, some sympathetic, others eager to watch a woman's downfall. Family members of David had taken their seats, their cold expressions silently condemning Claire. Vanessa, on the other hand, thrived on the attention. She strutted through the courthouse like a celebrity, her heels echoing with confidence, her lips curved in a smile that dared anyone to question her place beside David. David himself looked polished, his tailored suit perfectly pressed, his gaze fixed forward as though he were the victim. He whispered to Vanessa, who laughed softly, ensuring Claire could see every moment of their intimacy. The display was deliberate, a performance designed to break her before the trial even began. Claire sat quietly at her table, her attorney murmuring strategy in her ear. But her mind was elsewhere. She could feel the eyes of the room drilling into her, measuring her strength, searching for cracks. She rubbed her stomach gently, grounding herself in the life she carried. "For you," she whispered under her breath. "I'll survive this for you." The tension rose when the media was allowed inside. Photographers clicked relentlessly, capturing every flicker of emotion. Claire forced herself to sit tall, though inside she trembled. The humiliation of having her private pain dissected by strangers was unbearable. Every whisper, every camera flash, reminded her that this was more than a divorce. It was a public spectacle. Then the bailiff called for silence. The heavy doors opened and the judge entered. The room fell still, a hush sweeping across the crowd as Judge William Carter took his seat on the bench. His expression was unreadable, his gavel striking with authority. To everyone else, he was simply the figure of justice. But to Claire, he was something far more. A father she hadn't seen in years. A man who carried his own guilt and secrets. Their eyes met for the briefest second, and in that moment, Claire felt both a flicker of hope and a wave of dread. The trial was about to begin, and no one in the room knew the explosive truth about the judge's connection to the woman they were all ready to condemn. The courtroom was already thick with tension, every breath held as testimony began. Claire Bennett sat quietly at her table, her attorney presenting arguments with calm precision. She listened, her hands resting protectively on her belly, while the judge, her father, remained composed and distant, careful not to betray even a flicker of recognition. Across the aisle, Vanessa Monroe shifted in her chair, visibly restless. The attention from the cameras wasn't enough for her. She wanted more. She wanted domination. She wanted to humiliate Claire, not only through the trial, but in a moment so brutal that no one would ever forget it. As the attorney for David finished outlining his claims, painting Claire as unstable, too emotional, and unfit to manage their shared wealth, Vanessa leaned toward David and whispered something that made him smirk. Then she stood abruptly, ignoring the judge's warning glare. "Your Honor," Vanessa's voice rang out, dripping with venom. "Why are we even pretending? This woman is pathetic. Look at her, crying, hiding behind her pregnancy as if that excuses her weakness. David deserves better than this." The courtroom gasped. Claire's eyes widened, her lips trembling as she fought to stay composed. The judge's gavel struck sharply. "Miss Monroe, sit down. This is not your place to speak." But Vanessa didn't care. She strutted toward Claire's table, every heel strike echoing like a countdown. "You think carrying his child makes you special?" she sneered. "You're nothing but a burden. You couldn't keep him satisfied, and that's why he came to me." Claire's heart pounded, her face burning with shame as the entire courtroom watched. Her attorney tried to block Vanessa's advance, but before anyone could stop her, Vanessa's hand shot out. The sound of the slap cracked through the courtroom like thunder. Claire's head jerked to the side, her cheek flaming red as gasps erupted around the room. Instinctively, she clutched her stomach, tears springing to her eyes. Chaos followed. The bailiff rushed forward, cameras clicked wildly, and reporters scrambled to capture the scandalous moment. Claire sat frozen, trembling, her humiliation complete. For the first time, she looked as though she might shatter in front of everyone. David didn't move to help her. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. Vanessa stood over Claire, triumphant, her voice dripping with cruelty. "See, even your dignity is gone. You don't deserve him. You don't deserve anything." The gallery buzzed with whispers, some horrified, others feeding off the spectacle. Claire's world spun, her vision blurred with tears. She wanted to scream, to fight back, but fear for her child held her in place. On the bench, Judge William Carter's hand tightened around his gavel until his knuckles turned white. His mask of neutrality cracked for just a second, his jaw clenched with fury, but he said nothing. For now. What no one realized was that the slap was only the spark. The explosion that would follow would tear open secrets powerful enough to change everything. The echo of Vanessa Monroe's slap still hung in the air like a gunshot. For a moment, the entire courtroom froze. No one moved, no one breathed. The sound of Claire Bennett's muffled gasp was the only thing breaking the silence as her hand clutched her belly, her eyes wide with both pain and fear. Then, chaos erupted. Reporters scrambled to their feet, cameras flashing furiously to capture the image of the humiliated pregnant wife. Gasps rippled through the gallery, followed by a wave of whispers that grew into a roar of scandal. Did she just hit her? Oh my God, on camera! This will be everywhere by tonight. Claire sat motionless, her cheek burning where Vanessa's hand had struck. She blinked back tears, refusing to let them fall in front of the crowd. Inside, though, her heart was breaking. She wasn't just a woman betrayed. She was a mother terrified for the safety of her unborn child. Her attorney leapt up, shouting for order. Your Honor, this is outrageous. My client has been physically assaulted in open court. The bailiff hurried forward, grabbing Vanessa by the arm. But Vanessa only laughed, tossing her hair as if she had just won a prize fight. What? Someone had to put her in her place. Her voice dripped with arrogance, feeding the frenzy of onlookers. David Carter remained in his chair, cold and unmoving. He didn't flinch, didn't rise to defend his wife or even to calm his mistress. Instead, he leaned back, watching with detached amusement, as if the slap had been nothing more than a scene in a play he directed. His silence cut deeper than Vanessa's hand ever could. The judge's gavel slammed against the bench. Order! Judge William Carter's voice thundered through the chamber, but his eyes betrayed a storm raging inside. His daughter had just been struck before his very eyes, and yet he was bound by the robes he wore, forced to maintain the illusion of impartiality. Claire's breathing quickened. She pressed her hand firmly against her stomach, whispering under her breath, "Please stay safe. Please don't let this hurt you." For her child, she would endure anything. But the sting of Vanessa's hand, the weight of David's silence, and the cruelty of the public gaze felt unbearable. The gallery erupted again, some voices condemning Vanessa, others whispering that perhaps Claire had deserved it. The cruelty of strangers stung as much as the betrayal of loved ones. Claire lowered her eyes, her dignity crumbling under the weight of humiliation. Yet through the chaos, one truth became clear. The slap had changed everything. No longer was this just a divorce case. It had become a public spectacle, a war of character and reputation. And somewhere beneath the gavel, behind the mask of the judge, a father's fury was quietly building. The courtroom thought they had witnessed the peak of scandal, but the storm about to break would make the slap look like nothing at all. Behind the polished mahogany bench, Judge William Carter sat rigid, his gavel still trembling from the force of his last strike. His face remained a mask of authority, but beneath that mask raged a storm no one in the courtroom could see. The woman who had just been slapped was not merely another plaintiff in a messy divorce case. She was his daughter, his flesh and blood, humiliated before the world while he was sworn to silence. Every instinct in him screamed to rise, to step down from the bench and shield her, to wrap her in the protection only a father could give. But his black robe was both his shield and his chain. The law demanded impartiality. To reveal the truth now would destroy the trial, ruin his career, and possibly invalidate everything that was about to happen. Yet as he looked at Claire, sitting small and fragile at her table, her hand pressed against the swell of her stomach, his heart ached with unbearable guilt. He had not been present in her life for years. Choices, regrets, and distance had carved a canyon between them. And now, the first time their lives intersected so publicly, he was forced to watch her be struck like prey before a pack of wolves. The gallery buzzed with whispers. Vanessa Monroe smirked, reveling in the chaos she had created. David sat smugly beside her, utterly unashamed. Their arrogance boiled William's blood. He clenched his fists beneath the bench, his jaw tight, every muscle straining to hold back the fury inside him. He glanced at Claire again. For just a second, their eyes met. Her gaze was broken, yet somewhere deep inside, there was still a flicker of strength. That flicker was what kept William from shattering his role in that very moment. He had to protect her, not with rage, but with justice. Justice that would be colder, sharper, and more devastating than any slap. "Miss Monroe," his voice rang out, steady though his chest thundered. "One more outburst, and you will be held in contempt." Vanessa rolled her eyes, but returned to her seat, whispering something into David's ear that made him smirk. The sight was almost too much for William to endure. His hand hovered over the gavel, not as a judge, but as a father barely restrained. He forced himself back into control, reminding himself that patience was his weapon. The trial was only beginning. Evidence had yet to be presented. And when the truth came to light, it would not be a mistress's slap or a husband's betrayal that defined the day. It would be the judgment of the court. His judgment. But even as he told himself this, William knew something with chilling certainty. He would not allow them to destroy Claire. Not as a judge, not as a father. The fury he buried beneath the black robe was waiting to erupt, and when it did, it would turn the entire trial upside down. The courtroom returned to order, but inside Claire Bennett, there was no calm. Her cheek still stung from Vanessa's hand, but the pain was nothing compared to the humiliation pressing down on her chest. She sat rigid, hands trembling as she gripped the table, trying to steady her breathing. Every eye in the room was on her. Every camera lens was capturing her weakness. She wanted to disappear. She wanted the floor beneath her to open and swallow her whole. For a fleeting moment, she even wished she could run out of the courtroom, escape the suffocating glares and hide where no one could reach her. But her hand drifted to her stomach, and the tiny flutter of life within reminded her why she could not leave. She wasn't just fighting for herself, she was fighting for her child. Still, the weight was unbearable. Every whisper in the gallery cut into her like a blade. Pathetic. No wonder he left her. She looks broken. Claire heard it all, whether the words were spoken aloud or only written across judgmental faces. Her pride, her dignity, the very core of her identity seemed to crumble under the pressure. Her attorney leaned close, whispering reassurance. "Stay strong. This isn't over. The evidence is on our side." But Claire barely heard him. Her ears rang, her vision blurred, and her heartbeat thundered like a drum. The stress, the betrayal, the public shaming, it was all too much. In that dizzy moment, she thought about the past year. The joy of discovering her pregnancy, the heartbreak of uncovering David's betrayal, the sleepless nights of silent suffering, and now, the cruel slap that had played out in front of strangers. She felt stripped bare, like her life had been torn apart for everyone's entertainment. Her throat tightened, tears welled in her eyes, and she fought desperately to hold them back. She knew the cameras were waiting for the moment she broke, the moment the strong attorney became nothing more than a shattered wife. But the tears betrayed her. One slipped down her cheek, glistening under the harsh courtroom lights. Vanessa saw it and smiled. A slow, cruel smile that told Claire she had won. David leaned toward Vanessa, whispering something that made her laugh softly. The sound of that laughter shattered what little was left of Claire's composure. She bent her head, covering her face with her hand, her shoulders trembling as silent sobs racked her body. The gallery erupted again, reporters scribbling furiously, cameras flashing like lightning. To the world, Claire Bennett looked finished. And for a terrifying moment, she believed it. She felt herself slipping, falling into a pit of despair so deep she wondered if she would ever climb out. But just as she teetered on the edge of collapse, her gaze lifted, meeting the judge's eyes. For the briefest second, she saw not the stern figure of justice, but the quiet, protective gaze of a father. Claire thought she was utterly alone, but the truth staring back at her from the bench would soon change everything. Judge William Carter sat stiffly behind the bench, his robe heavy with the burden of duty. The courtroom saw him as a man of law, calm, impartial, detached. But beneath that exterior, a father's heart raged. Watching Claire tremble, seeing her shoulders shake as she tried to hide her tears, tore at him more than any gavel strike or courtroom outburst ever could. He couldn't rush to her side. He couldn't reveal the truth, not yet. Every eye in the room was watching, and one slip could end the case, destroy his credibility, and rob him of the very power he needed to protect her. But he couldn't sit idle either. He had to find a way to tell her, without words, that she was not alone. As Claire lifted her head, her red-rimmed eyes locking with his, William made his choice. It was the smallest of gestures, almost invisible to anyone else. He set his pen down softly, then adjusted the papers before him in a deliberate pattern, a signal only someone who knew him intimately could understand. Years ago, when Claire was just a little girl, struggling through spelling tests and math problems, he had used that same signal. A tap of the pen, a quiet adjustment of papers, and then a subtle nod. It meant, "I'm here. I see you. Don't give up." Now, across the chasm of years and the cold formality of the courtroom, he used it again. Claire's breath caught. Her heart stumbled in her chest as the memory rushed back. She blinked, unsure if she had imagined it, but then his eyes softened, just for a fraction of a second. It was enough. Her despair eased, replaced by a fragile thread of hope. For the first time in what felt like forever, she didn't feel abandoned. She wasn't a broken wife, sitting alone against a merciless mistress and a cruel husband. She was a daughter, silently shielded by a father who still cared. Vanessa, oblivious, continued to smirk at the cameras. David leaned casually in his chair, smug in his belief that victory was certain. Neither of them noticed the silent exchange that had just passed, an exchange that would soon tip the scales of the trial. Claire straightened slightly, wiping the tears from her cheek. Her attorney glanced at her, surprised to see a flicker of strength returning to her posture. She whispered, "We keep fighting." Across the bench, William's jaw tightened. He couldn't embrace her, couldn't say the words she needed to hear, but his resolve solidified. If Vanessa and David thought they could crush his daughter so easily, they were gravely mistaken. Justice was coming, and he would deliver it with precision. The mistress thought her slap had broken Claire forever, but what she didn't know was that a father's silent promise had just reignited his daughter's will to fight. The courtroom settled once more, but the undercurrent of tension was thicker than ever. Reporters leaned forward in their seats, pens ready, cameras still snapping at every flicker of emotion on Claire's face. The slap had shifted the trial from legal proceedings into a public circus. Yet behind the noise, something else was brewing, evidence that neither David Carter nor Vanessa Monroe had anticipated. Claire's attorney rose, adjusting his tie with a calm confidence that contrasted sharply with the smug arrogance radiating from David's side of the courtroom. "Your Honor," he began, his voice steady, "we would like to present new documentation regarding financial discrepancies tied to Mr. Carter's accounts." The gallery murmured. David's attorney stiffened. Vanessa frowned, her smirk faltering just slightly. The first set of exhibits displayed wire transfers. Large sums of money moved into offshore accounts under shell company names. Claire's attorney continued. These funds were withdrawn during the course of the marriage, without Mrs. Bennett's knowledge. We believe they were used to finance Mr. Carter's extramarital lifestyle. A ripple of shock ran through the gallery. Journalists scribbled furiously. David shifted in his seat, his composure cracking. "That's ridiculous," he snapped. "Business investments, that's all." But the attorney wasn't finished. He pulled out a folder and laid down photographs, images of David and Vanessa entering luxury resorts, receipts for jewelry, private jet bookings, and spa treatments. Each document carried David's signature or credit card authorization. Claire sat still, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Every piece of evidence was another cut. But this time, it wasn't her bleeding. It was David. For the first time, she saw the smugness falter in his eyes. Vanessa leaned toward him, whispering furiously, her mask of confidence cracking under the weight of exposure. The gallery gasped louder with each photo displayed, the narrative shifting before everyone's eyes. Claire was no longer the pathetic, abandoned wife. They could all see now who had been deceived, who had been used, and who had been betrayed. The judge watched carefully, his gavel silent, but his presence commanding. William Carter's chest tightened with both pride and anger. Pride that his daughter's side was finally gaining ground. Anger that this truth had to be dragged out in such a public, humiliating way. David slammed his hand on the table. "This is irrelevant. It has nothing to do with the divorce settlement." His voice cracked, desperation leaking through the cracks in his once perfect image. The attorney didn't flinch. "On the contrary, Mr. Carter, it has everything to do with it. These documents show a deliberate attempt to hide assets, deceive your wife, and squander marital funds on your mistress. The court has the right to know the truth." The gallery erupted again, the scandal spiraling out of David and Vanessa's control. And as the evidence piled higher, Vanessa's face paled. For the first time, the woman who thrived on cruelty looked uncertain. What neither David nor Vanessa knew was that the most damning piece of evidence had yet to be revealed, and it would strike harder than any slap ever could. Claire Bennett sat in silence as the evidence unfolded, each photograph and receipt landing like stones on the coffin of David and Vanessa's lies. Hours earlier she had been trembling, broken under the weight of humiliation, believing her life was over. But now, as she watched David squirm and Vanessa whisper furiously, something inside her began to shift. The humiliation of the slap still burned on her cheek, but the sting no longer felt like defeat. Instead, it was fuel. The tears she had shed in silence were drying, replaced with something steadier, something stronger. For the first time in months, Claire felt a spark of power in her chest. She thought of her unborn child. She thought of the nursery waiting for a future that David had tried to steal. She thought of every cruel laugh, every mocking glance Vanessa had thrown at her. Every night she had cried alone while the world believed she was weak. And she realized she was not powerless. She had survived all of it. She was still standing. Slowly, Claire straightened in her chair. Her hands no longer trembled, her breathing calmed. Her attorney paused mid-sentence as he noticed the subtle transformation, giving her a small nod of encouragement. The cameras caught it too. The woman who had entered the courtroom, defeated, now looked different. Her posture was firm, her chin lifted. There was no arrogance in her expression, only quiet strength. The gallery sensed the change. The whispers softened, replaced by curious stares. Was this the same woman they had seen collapse in tears? Claire's presence shifted the air itself, as if the tide of the trial had begun to turn in her favor. Vanessa noticed it too. She leaned forward, narrowing her eyes at Claire. "Don't think this changes anything," she hissed across the aisle, but her words lacked the sharp confidence they once carried. Claire didn't flinch. She simply looked back at Vanessa, her eyes calm, steady, and unyielding. It wasn't anger she radiated, it was resolve. A resolve that terrified Vanessa more than rage ever could. David tried to reassert himself, clearing his throat and whispering loudly to his attorney, but his voice cracked. For the first time, he looked uncertain, glancing between Claire and the evidence piling against him. The control he thought he owned was slipping through his fingers. Claire touched her stomach again, not in fear this time, but in reassurance. She wasn't just protecting her baby anymore. She was fighting for both of them, and she wasn't afraid to be seen doing it. The cameras captured the transformation. By evening, her image would flood headlines not as a victim, but as a woman who had risen from humiliation to strength. And while David and Vanessa still believed they could crush her spirit, they had no idea that Claire's fight was only just beginning. And the next strike would not come from her, but from the very bench they underestimated. The courtroom was no longer on David Carter's side. What had started as his confident march toward victory was crumbling piece by piece. The financial records had painted him as a man who bled money into luxury escapes, all while his pregnant wife suffered in silence. The gallery no longer whispered with pity for David. They murmured with outrage. And Vanessa Monroe, once triumphant, now shifted uncomfortably under the weight of stares that had turned sharp and judgmental. Claire's attorney wasn't done. He stepped forward again, his voice calm but commanding. "Your Honor, we now present corroborating testimony, witness statements confirming Mr. Carter's extramarital activities with Ms. Monroe." The bailiff distributed sworn affidavits. Gasps spread like wildfire as the details were read aloud. Hotel clerks who had checked David and Vanessa in under false names, waiters who had seen them dining intimately, even a chauffeur who drove them to secluded getaways. Each statement was a nail in the coffin of their denials. David slammed his fist on the table. "Lies. All of it. They're making this up for money." His voice cracked, desperation spilling into every word. But Vanessa's mask slipped further. Her jaw tightened, her lips pressed into a thin line. She leaned close to David, hissing through clenched teeth. "I told you we should have covered this better." The microphones caught it. The gallery erupted. Reporters scrambled to jot the quote down, their pens scratching like wildfire across their pads. Cameras zoomed in on Vanessa's pale face, her arrogance stripped bare. Claire sat quietly, her strength steady, her eyes fixed forward. For months, she had been painted as the weak one, the abandoned wife. Now, the roles were reversed. It was David and Vanessa squirming under the lights, exposed for what they truly were. Her attorney laid the final blow for that day's testimony, a series of text messages obtained from David's second phone. They were projected onto the screen for the entire courtroom to see. "She'll never see it coming. Don't worry, the money's hidden. By the time she realizes, it'll be ours. Once the baby is born, I'll make sure she's out of the picture for good." The words hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. Claire's breath caught in her throat, her hand instinctively clutching her stomach again. The gallery gasped in horror. Even the reporters looked shaken, their pens momentarily stilled. The judge's gavel pounded. "Order in the court." But the damage was done. The entire room now saw David not as a husband wronged, but as a predator plotting to strip his wife and child of security, dignity, and love. David's face turned crimson. Vanessa looked as though the floor had dropped beneath her feet. For the first time, their confidence shattered completely. And while they struggled to recover, they didn't realize that the most devastating revelation had yet to come. One that would destroy not only their lives, but their very sense of power. The courtroom was no longer just a place of law. It had become an arena of scandal. The walls seemed to shake with the noise of outrage, shock, and disbelief as the text messages glowed across the projector screen. Words that revealed cruelty and malice now echoed in the minds of everyone present. "Once the baby is born, I'll make sure she's out of the picture for good." The gallery erupted. Some gasped loudly, others covered their mouths in horror. A woman in the back row whispered, "She's pregnant, and he wanted to erase her?" A man muttered angrily, "That's not just betrayal, that's inhuman." Reporters scribbled furiously, already drafting headlines that would shake the city by evening. Camera shutters clicked non-stop, capturing David's flushed face and Vanessa's pale, frozen expression. The scandal was no longer a private wound. It was public property, and the court of public opinion had already begun its ruthless judgment. Claire Bennett sat silently, but her silence no longer looked like weakness. It looked like strength. Every eye turned toward her, no longer with pity, but with admiration. She was the wronged wife, the expectant mother betrayed and plotted against, yet still standing with dignity. She hadn't raised her voice, hadn't lashed out. She didn't need to. The truth was speaking louder than anything she could ever say. Vanessa shifted in her chair, panic flashing across her face. She tried to whisper excuses to David's attorney, but her voice trembled. For the first time, she was no longer in control. The smirk that had once defined her had vanished, replaced by the unmistakable shadow of fear. David, however, tried to fight back. He slammed his hands on the table and shouted, "These are taken out of context. It's a setup. Claire is trying to destroy me." But his words rang hollow. The gallery laughed bitterly, and someone muttered, "He's finished." Even the judge's gavel couldn't silence the murmurs that swirled like a storm. William Carter pounded the bench, his voice booming, "Order! Order in the court!" Slowly, the room quieted, but the shift in energy remained. The tide had turned. Claire's attorney leaned toward her, whispering, "They've lost the crowd. That's more powerful than any evidence." Claire gave the faintest nod, her hand resting gently on her stomach. For the first time, she felt the world wasn't against her. It was standing with her. Outside the courthouse, news vans waited, ready to broadcast every detail. Inside, strangers who had once stared with judgment now glared at David and Vanessa with disgust. In a single afternoon, their public image had shattered beyond repair. But as devastating as this exposure was, the trial was not yet over. There were still truths hidden, secrets waiting to be revealed. And the most dangerous one was sitting silently on the judge's bench, cloaked in black robes. The courtroom believed the scandal had reached its peak, but the revelation of blood ties between the judge and the woman on trial would send shockwaves no one was prepared for. The courtroom air was thick, heavy with the weight of betrayal and the raw sting of truth. For hours, evidence had dismantled David Carter's carefully built facade, and Vanessa Monroe's arrogance had melted into desperation. The gallery had turned against them, but still, they clung to denial. David shouted objections, Vanessa whispered excuses, their attorney scrambling like a man drowning. At the bench, Judge William Carter could no longer remain just a judge. He had endured silently, watching his daughter slapped, mocked, and humiliated. He had buried his fury beneath the black robe, clenching his fists until his knuckles turned white. But the moment had come when silence was no longer justice. He lifted the documents before him, Claire's financial exhibits, the text messages, the testimonies. His gavel struck once, the sound commanding absolute silence. This court his voice boomed, has seen evidence not of a marriage gone sour, but of calculated deception, financial manipulation, and cruelty beyond measure. The gallery leaned forward, breathless. Claire froze, her heart pounding. His tone was not the cold detachment of a judge. It carried the fire of something deeper. David rose to his feet, pointing toward the bench. "You can't speak to me like this. This trial is biased. This whole thing is a setup." William's gaze locked on him, steady and unyielding. "Biased?" His voice dropped lower, sharper. "You struck at a woman carrying your child. You plotted to strip her of dignity and security. You stood by while your mistress assaulted her in open court, and now you accuse this process of bias?" The gallery erupted with gasps and murmurs. Reporters scribbled furiously, sensing something monumental unfolding. Vanessa tugged at David's sleeve, panic flashing in her eyes. William leaned forward, his voice resonant. "You forget yourself, Mr. Carter. You forget that justice does not bend to arrogance. And you forget." He paused, his eyes flicking briefly to Claire. For the first time his mask slipped, and the truth shimmered in the air. "You forget that every action has consequences." Claire's breath caught. It wasn't a confession, not yet, but it was the closest he had ever come to acknowledging their bond. Her chest tightened, tears pricking her eyes, not from despair, but from a fragile hope she had thought long dead. David sputtered, "This is outrageous. I demand a mistrial." But his voice cracked, and his words carried no weight. The judge's gavel slammed down again, louder this time. "You will sit down, Mr. Carter, or you will be held in contempt of court." The power in his tone silenced even the boldest whispers in the gallery. Claire felt it, the shift. For the first time, the courtroom wasn't just watching her humiliation. They were watching justice gather like a storm, and it was aimed squarely at David and Vanessa. But the storm was far from over, because the moment the truth of the judge's bloodline was spoken aloud, the scandal would explode beyond anything the courtroom had ever seen. The silence that followed Judge William Carter's booming words was deafening. The gavel still vibrated from his strike, echoing like thunder through the chamber. David Carter, once smug and untouchable, now stood pale and furious, his carefully polished mask shattered. Vanessa Monroe sat beside him, her face drained of its former arrogance, her eyes darting like a cornered animal searching for escape. Claire Bennett remained seated, calm now, her posture straight, her eyes fixed forward. The tide had turned completely. She no longer felt the crushing weight of humiliation pressing on her chest. Instead, she felt the quiet strength of justice wrapping around her like armor. Her attorney rose, his voice steady but sharp. "Your Honor, given the evidence presented, financial fraud, reckless endangerment, and blatant abuse, we move to dismiss all of Mr. Carter's claims and request full protection for Mrs. Bennett and her unborn child." The gallery gasped. The request was bold, but it was backed by truth. The mountain of evidence, the testimonies, the damning text messages, it was undeniable. David had not only betrayed his wife, he had tried to strip her of everything, even her future as a mother. David's attorney scrambled, his words tumbling out in panic. "Your Honor, surely we can negotiate." But William's gavel cut him off. "Enough. This court will not be manipulated with half-truths and excuses." His voice carried the weight of finality. David lost control. He slammed his hands on the table, shouting, "You can't do this. I built everything. She was nothing before me." His voice cracked with desperation, his arrogance unraveling into madness. The gallery erupted in outrage. "Monster," someone shouted. Another voice cried, "She deserves better." The wave of public opinion crashed down harder than any gavel strike could. Vanessa, realizing the ship was sinking, turned on David. "This is your fault," she hissed, her voice sharp enough to cut. "You promised me she'd be gone, that we'd have everything. Now look at us." Their perfect alliance dissolved into chaos before the eyes of the world. Cameras captured every word, every desperate gesture, every ounce of venom they spewed at one another. The glamorous mistress and the powerful husband were no longer feared. They were pitied, mocked, despised. Judge Carter stood tall. "This court finds that Mr. Carter's actions constitute financial misconduct, emotional cruelty, and gross neglect of his duties as a husband and father. Assets will be frozen, and Mrs. Bennett will retain full protection under the law." His gavel came down with finality. The gallery erupted in applause, something rarely heard in a courtroom. Claire's eyes welled with tears. not of pain this time, but of relief. For the first time in months, she could breathe. David collapsed into his chair, his face buried in his hands. Vanessa turned away from him, her head lowered, her victory spoiled, her reputation destroyed. They had plotted to ruin Claire, but instead they had ruined themselves. Yet just as the courtroom believed the drama had reached its conclusion, the truth of blood and family, long hidden, was about to surface. And it would shake every soul in the room. The gavel's final strike still echoed when the courtroom fell into stunned silence. David Carter sat defeated, his empire crumbling. Vanessa Monroe, once smug and untouchable, now shrank under the weight of her own exposure. The gallery buzzed with whispers of scandal and justice. But amid the chaos, one truth had yet to surface. The truth Judge William Carter could no longer keep hidden. He removed his glasses and set them down carefully. His eyes lingered on Claire, and for the first time, he allowed the mask of impartiality to slip. His voice, deep and steady, carried not only authority but something far more personal. Before we conclude, there is one matter that must be spoken. Mrs. Bennett is not only a party in this case, she is my daughter. The words hit the courtroom like lightning. Gasps erupted. Reporters scrambled, their pens racing to capture the revelation. Claire's breath caught in her throat, her eyes widening as tears welled. For years, she had lived with the quiet ache of distance, believing her father had abandoned her. And now, in the most public moment of her life, he had claimed her before the world. William's gaze softened, his voice cracking ever so slightly. "Claire, I may have failed you in the past, but I will not fail you now. This court stands not only for the law, but for justice, and justice has been served." Claire's tears spilled freely, but they were not tears of humiliation this time. They were tears of release, tears of finally being seen, not as a broken wife, but as a daughter, a mother, and a woman who had endured and survived. The gallery, once divided, now broke into applause. Strangers wiped their eyes, touched by the sight of a father and daughter silently reconciling under the weight of justice. The cameras caught every angle, every tear, every flicker of dignity restored. David and Vanessa sat frozen, stripped of power, their legacy reduced to ash. They had plotted to destroy Claire, but in the end, they had exposed themselves and elevated the very woman they sought to ruin. Claire rose slowly, her attorney steadying her. She placed a hand on her stomach and looked toward her father. Their eyes met, and though no words passed between them, the bond was undeniable. She was not alone. She never would be again. As she walked out of the courtroom, cameras flashing around her, she no longer felt like a victim. She felt like a survivor, a mother, and a woman ready to rebuild. The scandal had not destroyed her, it had reborn her. Outside, the crowd parted, not to jeer or pity, but to admire. Claire Bennett, once humiliated, now stood as a symbol of strength. Her story was no longer one of betrayal, but of justice, resilience, and the unbreakable bond of family, a story the world would never forget. So my friends, here we are. The story has come to a close. If you've stayed with me until now, it means something in this journey touched your heart. Maybe it reminded you of your own struggles, maybe it stirred memories of pain, or maybe it lit a spark of courage deep inside. And that's the beauty of stories. They heal us. They remind us that we are not alone. Claire's journey teaches us that even in the darkest betrayal, we can rise. As the Stoics remind us, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Marcus Aurelius wrote those words centuries ago, yet they speak directly to what Claire discovered. She couldn't control David's cruelty or Vanessa's arrogance, but she could control her dignity, her resolve, her love for her child. And that's what saved her. Seneca once said, "Sometimes even to live is an act of courage." Isn't that the truth? Claire lived through shame, heartbreak, and humiliation, yet every tear she shed carried her closer to transformation. She didn't crumble. She endured. And in the end, endurance became her victory. So let's take this lesson with us. When life slaps us down, sometimes literally, we still have the choice to rise, to protect what matters, to find strength where we thought none existed. Healing doesn't mean forgetting the pain. It means refusing to let pain define us. If this story touched you, share it with someone who might need the reminder. Like this video, subscribe to our channel, and let's keep building a community where stories lift us up and remind us of our own strength. Because just like Claire, you too can rise from whatever tries to break you. And when you do, the world will see not your scars, but your courage.